should have this. I don't know if this is pink or salmon. I'm colorblind, like I said. Salmon, all right. Sheet, if you want to offer up an amendment, please feel free to do that at any time, because we are collecting them as we go through. I'd rather have us collect them now if you have an amendment, because that gives us the latitude. It just depends on how the rest of the afternoon goes as to whether or not we get to the amendments this afternoon, or depending on the discussions, if it would go into tomorrow morning. But if you know you want to do amendment, better to do it now so we have some of that flexibility at least. And once again, folks from finance, Doug Petrosik is in the back. Our finance director is right here in front. If there are questions in regards to budgetary impact, certainly please reach out to them as well. So we left off with human services, and as I had mentioned before, yes? Oh, I thought I heard someone. As I mentioned before, I did write down there were 4 individuals who actually had buzzed in before that. So I'm going to ask them to buzz in, have them recorded so we know the sequence we're going to follow. But before we actually start with them, we're going to give an opportunity for the Human Resources Director, Human Services Director, because I know he had some comments. But it was Supervisor Fari, if you could buzz in first. It was Supervisor Norton, second, exactly. Supervisor Finch was third. And then Supervisor Warnke, you were fourth. All right, very good. So, all right. Okay, and then Supervisor Albrecht is fourth. Okay, very good. Okay, so wanted to give an opportunity for our Human Services Director to provide some comments. I know you were up there and looking to do so before we took break. So please go right ahead.
Okay, I heard 3 questions that Mr. Eisen was making. One question was, why such large surpluses in the last several years? Second question was, what about an auditor to review our process? And 3, the question was about those 3 categories: group homes, professional services, and residential care centers, and making reductions in those 3 lines. Those were the 3 questions that I heard. So the first question is, why such large surpluses, and how does that work? And what I can tell you is that when I started here in 2008, first year I was here, we had a deficit. The remaining years we had surpluses. Every year the goal is to break even. The goal is to set a budget of what we really need to spend and try to hit that. And everybody knows that a budget is your best guess about what's going to happen next year. And in my area, what is very complex is that we're not just receiving money to spend it on staff, which we do. We can control to some degree what we're spending on staff. We can see how that's happening. But we have to spend a lot of service dollars to contract for service dollars, and those depend on the numbers of kids and families, adults that we need to see. So that cost is very flexible, very variable depending on the service area, and we have hundreds of smaller programs within human services, and each of those come with an expectation of providing some level of service. So we develop contracts for how much we think we're going to spend for those contracted services, and the big ticket items are when we have to place a child in a residential care center, which is 6 months to a year, at about $400 a day now. Other big expensive items are kids and adults in inpatient hospitals. That's about $1,000 to $1,200 a day. We also have to have kids sometimes go into group homes. That's about $30,000 to $50,000 a month. We also have to have kids be in foster care sometimes. We have to have them be in treatment foster care. So all of these levels of care, we have to estimate at this time, or actually this past summer, I had to estimate what do we need in each of those categories, what do we really think is going to happen. And what has been happening over the years is I've tried to make a case to you, and I have in 2008 and ongoing, is that I need more staff. In different years, I added staff in order to have a more community-based treatment array. And my hope was that as this treatment array developed and as people used those services, which are less costly, we'd use less in the expensive placement categories, which has turned out to be true. So good, in fact, that in child welfare, we are the envy of the state. If you look at our statistics versus almost every other county, our use of very expensive child welfare placements is flat versus other counties who are going way up. And you pick the category from foster care to group home to shelter care to residential care, and those costs are going up. Now, I can't budget for no placements. That is not a responsible thing for me to do, is to say, well, you know what? We haven't had placements at Lincoln Hills for the last 2.5 years. I'm going to budget 0 there. We haven't had residential placements more than 1, so we're going to go down to 1. We haven't had more than 3 in this category. I'm going to go down to 3. If I do that, that is not budgeting for what is likely to occur. And what I mean by likely to occur is that I think we've been having some very fair wins, if you want to call it that. I like to use the analogy of snowfall and the highway department. And the question about snowfall is, how much snow are we going to get and how much salt are we going to use? Okay, so the great decider for Mr. Pellinen is how much salt do I order and how much overtime do I have to plan for whatever the weather's going to be this winter. You have some rough idea based on past winters, but he's going to say, let's go with this because I think it's what I think we might need. Now, we may end up way better than that. We may end up having a very light winter, and we may still have, half the salt, so we're saving some money. And that's what's been happening in human services. It's been very fair winds for about the last 3 years. I'd love to say right now that I believe that that trend is going to continue on perfectly into the future. I am not convinced that it will. And there's a couple of reasons that I think that our placements will go up again, even though we're doing a great job of holding them down. One is human trafficking. Human trafficking is becoming a greater and greater issue. We're identifying kids more and more in that category, and the state has decided that it's going to become the county's responsibility to take care of those human trafficked individuals. So to answer the third question that Mr. Eisen asked, the group home is for 2 things. It's a group home for boys. We have an 8-bed facility right now. And depending on the utilization, we can, if it's full, it'll go up to $600,000 a year just for the boys. And we also have to budget 2 or 3 spots for the girls, which could bring it up another 100 to maybe 200,000 a year. We haven't had to use very often the girls' side because the boys have been slightly down and the girls kind of fit into that. So we've had some better expectations, and we did reduce that budget line item from last year to this year by dropping it down, I believe, $200,000. So we did drop that line. So let me tell you a little bit something else that happens in our budget. So in addition to the tax levy that you're providing us, we also bill Medicaid for many, many of our services. We'd like to get the Medicaid portion up higher than it is, and we just had a reduction that we had to put in our budget because we lost a Medicaid program that we can't perform. So we took a little bit of a dip there. We're hopefully going to make that up next year, and that's in the budget. And the other thing that happens is the state of Wisconsin, I'm going to say this as delicately as I can, they're doing some fuzzy math with some of the money that we are generating, the costs that we're generating. They put into a claim to the federal government. The federal government pays them 18 months later. The money comes back. They take off their cut, and they give us some number of, and it's usually in the hundreds of thousands. Sometimes it's 600,000, sometimes it's $1 million. But we have been asking them year after year, please identify what you're paying us for. Like what year, 2 years ago, that you're now reimbursing us for, because we can't budget this. This is the problem, is that the monies that Mr. Eisen is saying, yes, we've been coming in at very high windfalls, but those monies come into us very late in the year. It's happening again this year, September, October, November, December. The state says, oh, we're going to give you another $300,000 here for this. We're going to give you another $200,000 for here for that. And we can't budget that money. The money all goes back to the general fund because we're not using it for anything, but we're not budgeting it because we can't count on it. The minute I start counting on that money being there, we're going to start to see very wide swings. And one of the things that I responded to Mr. Eisen at 3:40 yesterday afternoon, and I started out my statement to him as saying, my budget can swing easily $1 million one way or the other, depending on a couple of handfuls of kids and based on these unexpected revenues that come in at the end of the year. That's $1 million swing for me. Sometimes it's really good, and in the last several years, in fact, I think we've had a surplus going back to 2009, and that's true, and I would agree that we do have that. But I feel that it's not prudent to budget monies that I can't see are directly resulting from an activity that we're doing that I can count on from year to year. I can do that with tax levy, I can do that with general aids from the state, so I know what's coming in there, but the rest of it is as best an educated guess as I can and make it. And I asked my staff, what can we get, what do you think is reasonable, what can we get by with? We put that into a budget, we went through our Human Services Committee process, they heard all of our rationale, had about an hour-long discussion with Mr. Harris in August. We went through it again. He asked us to trim our budget another $500,000, which we did. And if you look at page 375, you'll see the last several years of how much tax levy we've asked for in terms of an increase or decrease. So if you see on bottom of page 375, starting in 2014, we actually had, it came out with less than the tax levy than the year before by a small amount. 2015 meant that any new costs, expenses, salary and fringe, all had to, and any of our provider costs had to be kept at zero tax levy. So 2015, 2017, 2018, those 3 years, there was no new tax levy at all, even though our costs went up for salary and fringe and for provider costs and for hospitalizations, et cetera. And we did it, and we feel fine about that. 2019 and this year, coming up, we're asking for a 0.77%, $129,000 lift overall. So it is not nearly covering what would be our ordinary salary and fringe increases or provider costs. We're trying to continue to cut back. And so I think what you're going to see is that over time, our number is going to get closer and closer to break even as opposed to having large surpluses. I would like to see the surplus, if we're going to, I'd love to be able to say that we're going to have at least a little bit of a surplus every year, but I'd like it really to be in the $200,000 to $500,000 range, not in the million plus. And I really think that we're going there. I don't have any problems. If you want to cut it back further, we'll do fine with that. I really prefer that it wouldn't come out of group homes specifically, because I don't think that particular line is over budget. Professional services is for expert witness fees that we have to pay for court-appointed experts to testify in child cases. That's a guess, so 20,000 less there is not going to be problematic for us. The other line was residential care centers, and that line, $20,000 represents about 2 months of one-person stay. So again, we can deal with that. So if the will of this group is to find $240,000 more in terms of cutting our budget back, I would say fine. Please let us select where to take it from. That would be my only request of you, is to do that. And so I want to make sure I answer the questions. The first one was why the large budget surplus. The second one was what about audits? So I wanted to say that we have auditors spend 2 weeks a year, a week every 6 months. We have a room full of auditors, and they do nothing but review our books and check on what's happening, and they give reports to not only us, but they give it to the finance department, so you can see what we're doing at all times. And at the end of the day, any surpluses that are generated go back to the general fund. So then you have a little bit more in that account when you need to. So I hope that I've explained those 3 things that Mr. Eisen had asked, and if you have any more questions about that, please let me know.
Thank you, Director Topel. We'll start with Supervisor Fari, followed by Supervisor Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me go to Human Services, page 375. And this is for Mr. Harris. It says a tax levy of 18,382,000, increase of 139. See that?
Still going to 375.
Yeah, 375.
Okay, got it. So you're reading from the summary of significant changes?
Yes, department staffing, et cetera,
Oh, okay.
page 375. But what I find a little unusual then is I go, because their department is multiple pages, and I think they broke it out into different departments, is that correct?
Part of the budget, yeah, is by
Okay.
department.
We have 5 different divisions.
Yeah, the
Okay.
staffing is, this staffing chart is in total, I believe.
So then I go to page 404. And that says, the long-term support division shows a budget-to-budget levy decrease of $640,860, or 15%. Then I go to page 410. That is an economic support division, shows a budget-to-budget levy decrease of $563,058, or 54%. Showing me these different divisions of a department, I assume? Does that relate to the net change on page 375?
Yes, it does. The two you mentioned that decreases, there were 2 that had increases of similar sizes. One was the admin division, had an increase of 600 and some odd thousand because they...
Substantial amount, yes.
Well, it was switching because in the long-term services area and in admin, we were recording admin costs in one area. It was not correctly posted there, and it was a request that we switch the monies from that division to admin. So it was a dollar for dollar. We're going to decrease 600 and some thousand here. We're going to add it in the other division's budget. So they canceled out. The other area that went up, that you mentioned the decrease in economic support, there was an increase in behavioral health of 400,000, and then I believe
There is
Yeah.
there is a note in here about interdepartmental revenue transfers
On page,
on page 404. You know, the government accounting has to show everything gross. You can get the situation where, give an example, with our self-insurance. With our self-insurance, for instance, that when we went from regular insurance to self-insurance, we show an expense in all the departments for paying the contribution to the insurance. We then have to show that as a revenue in the area where the fund is, and then we show it as an expense again when it's actually paid out for insurance purposes. So there are times that the interdepartmental revenues end up showing, they end up distorting the picture, in effect. And I don't know, Bill, if you can see that note on 404, that it says, the highlights in long-term support. The levy decrease is due to the removal of an interdepartmental revenue transfer from Economic Support Division
Right.
to the Administrative Division.
Right.
This has a net effect of 0 to the department.
Right. So going back to what Mr. Fari asked in the beginning, does page 375 represent the net of all of the divisional changes?
Right.
The answer is yes.
okay, thank you. That's what I needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Fari. Next speaker is Supervisor Norton, followed by Supervisor Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Topo answered most of my questions, or was going to bring up in this document that Supervisor Eisen brought forth, but a couple of things. First of all, reduce the levy, $240,000, I would be definitely against that, because as Dr. Topo is pointing out, the Human Service Department was asked again to reduce it by about $500,000. And one of my questions would be, as part of that reduction, if I remember correctly, Dr. Topo and Vicki, you can correct me, was taken from labor account, because when he talks about on the second page about this average surplus of $1 million, it is my opinion, and you confirm or not, that much of the surplus that we've given back to the county comes half or nearly half has come from what unused labor. And would you
Yep.
generally agree to that?
Yes, I would. Page 382, you will see under the wage subtotal, we do have a wage turnover of 174,000, and then we have a corresponding fringe turnover, which equals 250,000 of the 5,000 you gave back was for wage turnover, just for vacancies and so forth.
And like I say, another thing, a couple weeks ago, me and Supervisor Singstock attended a Human Services Board Members Conference or one-day seminar, and we found out that this county doesn't even rank in the top 20 counties per capita will be spent on human services. I think I'm going to tell you, I'm very biased. I think we are under using our resources and revenues in some areas. Dr. Topo has done his best to keep his revenue expenses down in different service programs. Something I complain a lot to him. Trust me, he can tell you. I took a lot of reserves I wish that we give back. I think we should not give, that's the wrong word, should use to service that are needed in this county. So I definitely hope this board does not accept and reject this notion of further reducing this levy by $240,000.
Thank you, Supervisor Norton. Next speaker, Supervisor Finch, followed by Supervisor Albrecht.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been on human service for just a short period of time, and I'm still learning. But services are the most important part of human service, because we don't know until the end of the year what monies we really need for the budget. I personally have no problems whatsoever to help people in need. And I feel that's what we're here for, is to help people in need. So therefore, I personally have no problem with this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Finch. Next speaker, Supervisor Albrecht.
Well, I agree a lot with Supervisor Eisen's millions of dollars that he's projected there. But on the positive note of all those millions, it's put Winnebago County in one of the best financial counties in the county, or in the state, after all that being said and done.
Thank you, Supervisor Albrecht. Next speaker, Supervisor Fari. Okay, thank you. And I apologize, the reason I'm looking at it is that our board is going a little bit, so I apologize. I didn't see any other call-ins. Is there, Vice Chairman Egan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Topol, I have a question, and I don't want to elaborate on this because I think we've ironed it through quite a bit. The district attorney presented us with a program this morning, which the majority of the people thought it was quite good. I'm just wondering if you were talked to about that and what you thought about this program. And my third part of it is, if this program goes through, will you have any help that'll be giving on this program, and if there's going to be a charge?
Okay, I'll make my comment brief because I know you spent a lot of time on it. Christian Gossett started talking to me about this concept well over 6 months ago. I thought that it had promise. I wasn't sure with all of the diversion programs, and I guess maybe something that hasn't been harped on a lot is that Winnebago County has a fantastic number of diversion programs already, and in large part thanks to our district attorney. He's got lots of things going. We're part of that with the drug courts and safe streets. Our budget contains staff costs around, do you remember, 600? When I started, it was around 600,000, and I don't know if it's gone up a little bit. But But that's fine, because it's creating alternatives to incarceration. When he talked to me about it, I said, great. He had first wanted therapists and psychiatrists and most of my staff over at the one-stop shop, and I said, that isn't going to work for us because all my staff are really dedicated, either in Oshkosh or in Neenah, to clients they're seeing now. But what we kind of came up with is this navigator concept, which are the two positions that we call project positions, and it's a place to start. So the question really is, how much new diversion programs, new diversion alternatives will this work for? Maybe it'll be a lot, maybe it'll be a small number, but 2 years will give us an opportunity to figure that out, and so I'm on board with that. I think that I would just say that I think new programs are best if they're coordinated by a person. And we really didn't think about who was going to coordinate that. I do not believe that the district attorney nor myself have the time to coordinate that program. It should be someone that's kind of directing all of these county players, private players, and kind of coordinating those activities, because I could see a whole bunch of people all there going, I want to help, but then the flow isn't directed, or things get lost in the shuffle. So I would say if this works out as a concept, I would really seriously consider a coordinator type position for this. Right now, for my staff, they will be coordinated by the Safe Streets coordinator. Her name is Carol Morak, and she'll be coordinating and supervising my staff there. So I think that's fine. And as far as space goes, we can do it anywhere. We can make our part work wherever you all decide the place needs to be. So if it's in the basement, it's fine. If it's first floor or in another building, we'll make it work. Does that answer your question, Mr. Egan?
Yes, other than the last part.
Okay.
Will there be an extra cost for this, for your help coming in? Will we have to get another group to come in, and will we have to pay for them, or this be part of your staff?
So the two project positions are included in the amendment, and they will do assessments that Mr. Gossett talked about this morning, and they will warm handoff, or they will literally bring people over to our Oshkosh or Neenah office to get them connected with our services over there. So right now, I'm not anticipating that we need more therapy or psychiatry time right now, because I don't know what the numbers are going to be. If they get larger than about 50, I'm probably going to need to come back and ask for additional staff.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Egan. Next speaker is Supervisor Eisen, followed by Supervisor Nussbaum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have had an opportunity to read the email and correspondence from Dr. Topol, and I can appreciate what he has had to say. But it doesn't take away from the fact that when you better understand the budget, and I've been at this now for 13 years, you get an opportunity to learn a little more. And what's crystallized this budget season that wasn't there before was our experience with child support. And when we went into the meeting to discuss that, which was closed session, I had the same research that the finance director brought to the table in terms of looking back and comparing in that department what the adopted budget levy was and what the final, the actual budget levy was. Now, I applied that methodology to the other departments, and I realized that in the Human Services Department, there were 9 years of that discrepancy between the adopted and the actual. Now, having gone through the budget sessions, I was aware that when you're going to I would have recommended a larger amount than 240,000, but I figured I would tone that down because that would better be within the ballpark of what's feasible at this time. And I identified those particular accounts, 55046 group homes and 55014 professional services and 55047 child residential, because I could see in the budget the difference between the executive request and the projected for 2019. That's how I determined those particular amounts. I purposely put the county executive, the chairman, and Dr. Topol on notice of what I was doing and what I was working with, because I have no better knowledge to know that group homes, is the place to take away that money. In fact, you can see that the amount is less. 650,000 is what's budgeted this 2020, and 850,000 is what was budgeted for 2019. But 458,000 is what is projected for 2019. And so I assigned that particular amount to that category, hoping that that when the director would present to the board, that he could bring in whatever category, whatever, he knows the budget. He has a full-time accounting staff that works on this. They could identify where they can find that $240,000 or whatever this board deems to be an adequate sum to hedge the bet on a $1.6 million overage. And the reason I just identified those is because if you're coming in with an amendment, you got to have it go to a particular account. Where does that, you want to reduce it by 240, but where are you going to do it? Well, I put that in there because for lack of knowing more, okay, I at least identified that, and I figured that by the time it gets, if it becomes the will of the board to recognize that as a levy overage, the director and the board will find the proper account to credit or debit for that amount of money. The material that I distributed to you is what it is. It's the document, it's the synthesis of the data that is in the budget. It's all the information that we, as supervisors, get to understand the budget and to consider recommendations. I would love to sit through every meeting, and I probably am the only supervisor that's probably been to every Human Services public hearing over the last decade. I think I've gone to almost every year, and probably to 2 different sessions some years. But nonetheless, I certainly appreciate the director's situation, and if the logic of his discussion makes more sense than the history for 9 years, then that's the way to go. If this is it's not a win or lose. It's what's best for the county going forward to provide the best service to our residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Eisen. The only thing I would say is might be good if you touch base with Director Topol prior to when we review the amendments, because he actually did offer to make some suggestions of some areas that he thought would be reasonable to consider and still achieve what you're looking for.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I think it may be important to get the consensus of the board, whether they think that it's worthy, whether the recommendation of reducing that levy for that department is worthy recommendation. And if it's a worthy recommendation, then ask for the department to identify where they think the money should come from. But I think that's probably, I don't know what the procedure would be. Perhaps we can ask the corporate counsel what the proper procedure would be to identify that. Because certainly there could be a straw poll, there could be a vote, there could be a consensus, or however it is. If it's not something that the board wants to do, we'll just pass it by. There's no sense in pursuing it. But if it's something that the board believes it's time to confront, then we can go that way. I certainly accept the will of the board.
And just one follow-up point, though. In terms of the board and whether or not some folks would be willing to consider it, I think it depends on where the reduction would actually occur in the human services budget. So I think for a lot of folks, it might matter where in that budget you would actually be looking at doing the reduction. So that's why I was suggesting potentially.
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, I would hate to put the director on the spot because we went through this with the personnel function review. We went through that years ago in which the special committee was put together to examine all of the programs in all of the departments. And the response from the Human Services Department was that all of the departments are important, and we're not ranking them one to the other, and they didn't rank them, but they said that, well, if you're going to have to cut one, you should cut this particular program or that particular program. And so it was not a helpful way of approaching it. But if the board has a will that there's been excessive levy attributed to the department, then we can ask the director to see where that would be. Whatever the proper approach would be for the rules.
All right, very good. Thank you, Supervisor Eisen. Next speaker, Supervisor Nussbaum, followed by Supervisor Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to know if we reduce this budget and we intercept a van of kids in our county that we have to take care of, where would that money come from?
If the judge orders that van of kids to a certain type of placement and we don't have enough budgeted in that line, I would be coming here to let you know that there's not enough money in that line to cover that service, and I need to transfer some money from one location to another, or if I didn't have it elsewhere, I'd ask you to have it come out of the general fund. Is that what you're looking for?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Nussbaum. Next speaker, Supervisor Wojciechowski.
Mr. Chairman, has anyone even put forward a resolution yet, amendment to do this?
Not that I'm aware of. That's why I was making the point to Supervisor Eisen. If he was to make one, then he might want to seek some of the thoughts by Director Topol.
Yeah, so just because, I'd like to get this moving along, my recommendation, I guess, to Supervisor Eisen would be to meet with Dr. Topol during our next break and write a resolution out and let the board vote on it. But I think we've kind of discussed it as much as we can right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Wojciechowski. Seeing no other call-ins, that'll complete the Human Services Budget Review. Thank you, Director Topol. So we will move on to the next budget, and that's the... I apologize, I didn't see it. So Supervisor Finch and then Supervisor Fari. Please go ahead, Supervisor Finch.
Well, I guess where I'm coming from is, since I've been on this board, we're here to help people. As far as worried about a dollar or two, that's totally outrageous. We're here to take care of our people. If the children need the people, fine. But we're going to cut the budget because right now we don't need it. Well, what happens down the road? Then we got to take money out of the budget. We go from here, we go from there. Let's not be so, I got to be careful on my language, but let's take care of our people. That's what we are here for. And if you don't want to take care of the people, there's a door. You all have a good day now.
Okay, let's try to keep it civil now, though, okay? So thank you, Supervisor Finch. Next speaker, Supervisor Fari.
Mr. Chairman, for the benefit of Mr. Eisen, I believe perhaps he did not hear all of the comments from Mr. Topol. I heard Mr. Topol say that he could live with a reduction of $240,000 in his budget. I believe he stated that several times during his comments. And I also said his only request was that he be allowed to select the areas where the cuts would be made. Am I correct on that? So that is already...
Yes and no. Yes, with the two amounts of 20,000, certainly we can make those reductions right where Mr. Eisen is suggesting them, because it's hard to tell what we're going to need for expert witness fees and what we're going to need for residential. So I don't see a problem with those. I see a problem with the group home line, because right now I believe that if we have the boys that we think we're going to have and we have additional girls next year, that budget will all be used up, and I wouldn't like to see that number go down any further. If you all felt that it needed to be dropped another 200,000, I would work with my boss, the executive, to come up with the right place to take that from. My recommendation right now is I wouldn't decrease the budget another $200,000. I can, when you said I could live with it, if you directed that it to be done, I will find the place to do it.
So I think the point is that Mr. Eisen, per your comments, Mr. Chairman, needs to get together with Mr. Topol and decide how he wants and where he wants the money taken from, and then write out the resolution.
That's what I would suggest, yes.
Exactly, yeah. And I think Mr. Eisen didn't hear all of that. That's why I'm bringing it back.
Thank you, Supervisor Fari. Now, I see no other call-ins. Did I miss anyone? Because the board has been going off in different ways. Okay, so I'll call on Supervisor Norton, followed by Supervisor Eisen.
We have budget hearings for the Human Services every year, as Mr. Eisen pointed out. He came this year, he didn't suggest any one cut. He came to advocate that we have a county sales tax. This budget, yes, it was changed by the county executive. He had all this time to submit changes or ask requests for cuts, and he has not. Now here, at the 11th hour, he says, let's cut $204,000. He suggested where to come. And I do agree with Dr. Topol, the areas he wants to cut, he can't count on, because group homes and the child welfare service, the places where we place these people, individuals in homes, it varies from year to year. And I wish you could see what the Human Services Board, every month, we get an update on placements for adults and for juveniles or youth in all the different categories. I wish you could see that, and it can fluctuate. That's another thing. And to come here at the last minute, and I'll ask for an amendment, and I'll make suggested cuts. I'll vote against that, because I haven't fully seen it. I won't fully be able to digest it, and I think that should have been done earlier. So that's my 2 cents. I would reject this $204,000 cut, because we've already cut $500,000 from the budget that the Human Services Board approved or submitted and approved to send to the county executive in June. So that's what I'm saying. I think we reject that and reject the amendment that will probably become.
Thank you, Supervisor Norton. Next speaker is Supervisor Eisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, address Mr. Norton's concern of the last minute. We didn't get the budget until 2 weeks ago, and I don't know what kind of schedule or where he works, but I have other obligations as well. And just like most people, you spend your free time looking through the budget and trying to understand it and seeing what kind of improvements you can make. I would like to inquire whether it would be in order to either make a motion or to take a consensus of whether the board feels that it's appropriate to reduce the levy for the Human Services Department. In that fashion, we can make a decision whether to pursue it or not. As I had mentioned before, I identified those particular items simply because the projected amount approximated what my reduction was going to be, and only because you have to put you have to identify someplace to take the money from, and it's immaterial to me because I don't know that budget as well as others would, and so. Could we get a reading from the corporate counsel whether it is in order?
Yeah. No, yeah. Yeah, we won't do that.
Must be done by resolution.
Yeah. Yeah, we won't do that. You can offer up an amendment like you identified here, or you can offer up an amendment with other line items based on some advice you might get from Director Topol. But we would not be doing a vote here, because that's effectively like taking an amendment before we considered the other amendments that have also come forward. So, no, we won't do that.
It would be inappropriate to take a consensus of whether
No,
board members...
it's really essentially that's like doing an amendment in advance, So no, we won't do that. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? I do not see any on the board. The reason I keep asking that is because it flashes with a whole bunch at once. Okay, seeing none, we'll conclude the Human Services Board, and we'll move on to Parkview Health Center.
The chart of department staffing for Parkview is on page 426. For 2020, it's budgeted for 216 full-time employees and 10 part-time employees. There is a little difference in the way employment is counted at Parkview. I think some part-time employees are aggregated into a full-time number. So if you actually counted heads of employees, they have traditionally counted differently. But this reflects the number of FTEs. And the director is in the back that she can answer additional questions. The chart of significant changes is on 428 and 429. But on Parkview, this is an area where their reserve has actually exceeded the target number we've set for it. And we've applied a significant amount of that reserve to the budget because we want to bring it down and because that's a way of holding down the levy. But we do that with the realization that if their actual performance were to consume as much reserve as we're budgeting, at some point in time we would have to replace that reserve with levy money, and that's not an easy trick to do. So be aware that this budget does include a significant amount of a reserve that's beyond our target. but that's not going to be available every year.
Okay, we'll open it up for questions about the Parkview Health Center budget. Anyone? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on down to the next budget review, and that's the University Extension. Starts on page 450. And the table of organization changes on 455.
The, the budgeted full-time positions are 4 positions, the same as 2019. This area does need some explanation. The extension service is funded by a combination of local and state dollars. There's some positions that are support employees funded entirely by the county, and some positions that at one time were split between the county and the state. I'm not sure how that division still works. But there's also a regional aspect. At one time, everyone working for our extension service works solely for this county, but now some of the positions are regional in nature. So there's been a lot of changes. The director's in the back of the room, and the summary of significant changes is on page 456.
Okay, we'll open up. Any questions for the UW Extension budget? And our board, we are rebooting it, so I don't see any lights right now, so if you did want to speak, please, if you could just, Supervisor Norton?
If you can't explain, County Executive, maybe the extension director could, about these regional positions, who's all paying their salary? Is it just us half and the state half, or do we pay a part of it and the other counties who are part of the region pay for it? I guess I would like to know that.
Those are generally upper-level positions that would have a state contribution, but I think you could probably give them more details than I can.
Yeah, so in the last couple of years, as the what would be called the next gen model has been implemented within UW Extension, there was a shift from a 60-40 split, which 40% the county would be responsible for 40% of the UW Extension staff member's salary, and the state being 60%. That would, as we would have longer tenured staff who would gain, then those numbers would also increase. That has now shifted to those same staff members have shifted, and that is a flat fixed fee of $41,500 each. And that would be then whatever the balance is, that is the county's flat fee. That's the benefit is that that you're protected and it's predictable. Individuals that are the state portion, they would be picking up the remainder of whatever the salary, and they're managing the fringe benefits portion of that. Currently, Winnebago County has one staff member that is a half-time position. That is a full-time position. Half of the services, it's a community development educator. Half of the, so that $41,000 flat fee is then split equally between Outagamie County and Winnebago County, with then the remainder being part of the state, it would be the state cost of services.
Thank you, Supervisor Norton. Next speaker, Supervisor Albrecht.
I guess my question was basically the same. I was going to have the executive explain to me that when the state stopped funding it completely, you took over and funded it, or the Winnebago County did.
We've always funded the support staff,
I understand.
and we've split the other staff. As I just understand the explanation, that rather than a percentage split, it's a flat dollar amount. So is your question then, what about people that are serving a regional area rather than just this county? Is it the funding for those?
Also.
Okay.
So there is one University of Wisconsin Extension staff who is fully funded by Winnebago County as part of the contracted services agreement. Part of the next gen model was in response to a very significant statewide budget reduction, and there were reductions in positions that were made across the state. Every county was impacted in some way, shape, or form. Some counties did not have the financial resources to invest their fully, in the full salary and fringe rate of individuals. Winnebago County was one that is one currently that has the financial resources to invest in a human development and relationships educator as part of the contracted services agreement.
And what counties does that individual work in?
That individual works primarily, is employed in Winnebago County, and part of our extension model and how it works is that we also work with educators across a multi-county area and share resources and expertise. So while that individual is housed here, they may work in our neighboring communities, and in return, they will leverage the resources and bring individuals and or specialists from Madison, from other schools, into Winnebago County to serve areas of expertise in which that individual does not have.
Thank you, Supervisor Albrecht. Was there anyone else who wishes to speak on the UW extension budget? Okay. Oh, please, Supervisor Wingren.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to understand this. I think it's a terrific service that we offer, that's offered to our citizens. The budget isn't huge, but it has some interesting things in it. Computer software, $500. Advertising, $275. Rents and leases, $150, I think it's $600. But then we jump down on page 462, contractual services for 2020, $285,000, but no explanation. And I've gone back the last 10 years and looked, same thing every year. A huge amount, but it never says what it is. Is it possible to get a list, not right this second, of what those what the breakdown of that is?
Yeah, the contractual services are the UW extension staff members, the 41,000 flat fees, and
Okay.
for the 5 FTEs of 6 staff,
all right,
plus
okay.
that includes the one individual in which the full amount of the salaries and fringe benefits are included.
Might it be possible to list that differently then, to more specifically identify what that is?
We're following the format. We can work with the financial
Okay.
services team to identify
All right.
that in the future.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Wingren. I think it's a good point. I don't see any other call-ins. Was there anyone else? Okay. Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the UW University Extension budget review. Move on to Parks, which includes boat launch program. Starts on page 468 for the table of organization change.
Yeah. The department staffing for 2020 is 9 full-time individuals and 2 part-time individuals. That's an increase of 2 full-time individuals. And I believe that relates to changes we're making with regard to the use of seasonals and going to full-time people due to a less availability of seasonal workforce. But Rob Way's in the back, and he can give you answer any questions you have. There's also the summary of changes on page 469 and 470.
Okay, we'll open it up for any questions. Any questions of anyone on the Parks budget, which includes the boat launch program? I'll call on Supervisor Gabbard.
Rob, I just need a clarification from you on those 2 full-time park caretakers. Can you just describe what they're going to do?
The two positions involve one for the parks portion of the department, and the other is for the expo. The parks currently has 2 full-time people in it, 2 full-time caretakers. This would add to that, make it 3. On the expo side, we currently have no full-time workers. We have 2 permanent part-time individuals that primarily work on the evenings of Thursday, Friday, and Mondays, and then on weekends for a short time. So our coverage simply covers the clientele when they're in there. We need a full-time position in there to supplement and work alongside our maintenance supervisor in there, and to cover when he's not able to be there as well.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Gabbard. Seeing no other call-ins for Parks or the boat launch program? I apologize. Some of these are not lighting up, so I very much apologize. We'll call on Supervisor Albrecht, followed by Supervisor Warnke.
So that part-time, or those individuals, will they be there to help whoever comes to the park, or whoever comes to the Coglin Center, or to the parks? Will they be there to help that group do stuff, or will they just be there to tell them to do stuff?
No, these are hands-on individuals. These are ones that are the leads on some of the projects. They certainly supplement with when necessary, with our mowing and turf maintenance tasks, but the
No,
response...
I mean about vendors that come in. Will somebody be there to help somebody, or will they just be there to tell them, put that over there? Or I'm
Okay,
just
and if you're referring to the expo side in particular, yes.
On both sides.
Yeah, indeed, both sides of the park. Again, these are interchangeable positions. We don't necessarily draw a line, so one wouldn't be permanently assigned to the park or to the expo. But primarily, the duties of the expo person would provide for the vendor assistance on that side of the road. As far as vendors in the park, that's much less prevalent than on the expo side. You'd have to kind of give me an example of the...
I guess I'm trying not to say what people were complaining to me about. I'm saying that you will be there to help people that use your premises, whether it's the parks or the Coglin Center. I mean, there's been complaints, people complain to me that there hasn't been cooperation, which I guess is the polite way to put it. And I'm asking, is this person going to be cooperative with the parks?
Well, as a standard, our people are there to help. We do contact the public. We interact with them out in the park. As far as complaints, if you're referring to some of the dog issues that are taking place, those obviously we'll be working on that. That is something new with our situation, but I know of no real situations that are out there that are causing troubles.
Okay.
Thank you, Supervisor Albrecht. Now, I see no other call-ins. Is there anyone else? And I apologize, Supervisor Warnke.
Rob, I'd like to know what's happening with this big-time stage that you guys all pushed for and got through, where we were supposed to have all these world-famous entertainment coming in, and it took away our racetrack, which upset a lot of people. What's happening with that?
Currently, we have a company called Red Rock Productions under contract. They have bids out for 2 events. You have to pardon me, I'm not going to go into details on this at their request. It's something that is part of that industry, but we are in contact with them. We've just been talking to them last week. They're hopeful of a fall date for a fairly significant event. That would be in 2020. They're also looking at an August date. Again, they're conditional on their bids being accepted. As part of the industry, they're kind of at the mercy of agents and the sponsors accepting these bids. So nothing's for certain, but they have put these out. And I can't say when the timetable is, but I think we would know sometime early next year if they'll be putting on the events.
And what about all this land that was just recently bought out there that's supposed to be done? What's happening with that?
We are going to be bringing into the county board what is our master plan for the Expo Center. It includes a phased approach for development of that property. Indeed, one of the facets of that first phase might involve actually putting in some of the hard surface into that back area for access to start it going for camping, or again, the PGI event needs some of that access.
So you're gonna open up a campground back there now? Is that what this is, or is it just for certain events?
Correct. It would not be a, what would you term, a full-time campground, but it would be for servicing the events that come on the expo grounds.
What about the community garden thing?
I can just give you an update on observation. I know they're working with Highway. I believe the roads have been staked. I don't know if they're in yet. Yeah, I'm not sure what their timetable, but I know they have to have those roads in. They'll probably still go in fall. I believe it'll be up and running in all likelihood next spring.
Can you comment on the recent destruction of the soccer field that was out there? Has the person been caught? How much is it going to cost to repair that?
I was hoping you'd probably heard me interviewed umpteen times now, another one today on it, but it basically was confined to soccer field number 3, which is kind of a key field in the soccer complex. It will hurt the programming for all soccer down there, in particular OISC, the Oshkosh Youth Soccer Club, is going to have to make arrangements in all likelihood right into the middle of next summer working around that field, because it's not going to be worked on this year. There's no way we're going to be able to get on the turf and repair it. So it's going to go into next year as far as repairs go. As far as cost, how many estimates?
Okay. All right, thank you.
Up to 3,000 in all likelihood. And it's something that does happen quite often. As a matter of fact, it just happened the other day in another section of the park. We're trying to beef up our video cameras. We did not capture anything this time around, but we'll be working towards trying to get those individuals who do that.
Thank you, Supervisor Warnke. Next speaker, Supervisor Weiss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My questions are directed to Mr. Way. Just two things. Congratulations on the pyrotechnics for, I think it's in 2021. That was a great catch there. Thank you for that. That's going to help, I'm sure. Second is about the dog parks. As you know, I'm very adamant about getting a dog park up north, and I was just wondering what the status of that is. I don't see any notes in there other than this is on the 2020 goals. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that, please.
Certainly. Currently, we're in the status of working with the DOT. They've changed gears. We were going to lease the property at little or no cost from the DOT. They are now looking at just turning it over, deeding it over to the county. So that has slowed things down, but in a good way. That's partly why nothing's been done this year. There was budgeting this year for the access road along with a small parking lot to go in. In all likelihood, that'll have to be carried over and done next spring. As part of the capital projects list, there is also fencing and signage. And that's what that's being directed towards. That would go in next spring. So as far as timing goes, I could see a early to mid-summer startup if everything went well and weather cooperated. I do want to add there is one other thing we're working with the DOT on. Just like this property was a remnant and off of the 41 project, they have offered to the municipalities near another site, one of the sites we were originally interested in, for what would amount to a possibility of a small dog park. Usually these go in tandem. You try to separate it like we do out at our park. Brought this up to the Parks Committee, to the county exec, and we're looking into this other small remnant that would serve in that way. It already has a parking lot in it, so half the cost is already dealt with. So that might be coming to the county board sometime next year.
Thank you. Just one other question. Is that going to be near the original site?
Correct. Actually, it's directly across almost from, on the west side of 41.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Supervisor Weiss.
Can I inject a comment just
Please.
for any audience that's out there? A small dog park is referring not to the size of the park, but to the size of the dog. It would be a separate park
Sorry about
for
that.
small dogs to segregate them from the bigger dogs because they can't always be mixed. So it's real easy to hear that and think that he's talking about a dog park that's really small as opposed to one intended for smaller dogs. Just
You're hired, Mark.
Actually, I appreciate the clarification, to be honest, so thank you for clarifying. Now, the board does appear to be working now, but just before we go on, was there anyone else who wishes to speak about Parks and Boat Launch Program? No? Supervisor Norton.
Rob, I should have asked you in the committee, but I asked you, is that other property that we're looking at that I know Supervisor Joust knows about, is that coming before the board by the end of the year?
You probably can just name it the Stroud property. Yeah, it's a nature area that the family of the mother who has passed away is putting forth about a 30-acre parcel up near Winchester, a gorgeous spot that she's worked on with wild ones. It has a lot of components that are unique, I'll say unique in Winnebago County. And the family's been good enough to allow us to lease it at no cost, just the cost of the taxes, the annual taxes on a 25-year lease. Very minimal maintenance would be done on it. The paths and so forth are in. I'm hoping to bring that lease in November.
You know, I just want to put a plug in and for parks and for Rob Way. You know, I listen to the city of Oshkosh, and they deliberate their Parks Advisory Board, and their parks director, he gets a capital budget for like $200,000, and we have to really scrimp and beg for every bit. I know we've had a couple of different projects, major projects the last couple of years, but I just want to point it out that if you looked at your municipal parks department budgets, Oshkosh, main one that I know of, but maybe Neenah Masso, they considerably give a lot more to their capital projects than we do. I just want to point that out.
Thank you, Supervisor Norton. Next speaker is Supervisor Finch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Glad you're finally getting the dog back on Northern End. However, you know, Rob, when you said a small dog. Excuse me? All right. When you said a small dog, what are you talking about?
Size, I believe it's 1 foot at the shoulder.
Okay.
Yeah, and it is a small dog park too, by the way.
Well, I guess, are you going to tell me then the northern end is going to take the short end of the stick again and get a small dog park, and that's going to be it? Or are we going to eventually get a legitimate dog park for the northern end of the county?
No, the timing on that probably we'll know within the next month. I would hope the DOT would indicate if they're going to sell that other larger parcel on Ellers Road.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to hear you say it.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Finch. Now, I see no other call-ins. Okay, very good. So that'll conclude the Parks Department budget review. So we'll move on to the Register of Deeds, and that starts on page 490.
The department staffing for 2020 is 7 full-time individuals. That's the same staffing as there was in 2019. And the summary of significant changes is on page 491.
Any questions in regards to the Register of Deeds budget? I see none, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next department, and that is the Planning Department, which includes Property Lister and Land Records Modernization. Starts on page 498. And the table of organization change is 502.
So for the Planning and Zoning Department, there's budgeted for 14 full-time employees in 2020. That's the same as in 2019. And the listing of significant changes is on page 504. And of course, there's also the property lister and the land records modernization in that same grouping.
Okay, we'll open it up for any questions in regards to the Planning Department. Property Lister, Land Records Modernization. Okay, I see one light. Supervisor Fari.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm looking on page 502, and they're actually decreasing their levy. So that tells me the revenues are up, or nobody in that department got a raise. Which is it?
I think the revenues are probably up if those are the only two choices.
All right.
The head of the department is in the back of the room. I don't know if you want to expand on that.
I see they're fully staffed. For a while they were not, so perhaps that saved some money, I imagine, but.
Please go right ahead.
Anybody get a raise in your department?
Yeah, well, we all get our raises,
Okay.
yes. But, we had an increased revenue for 2020. We have a new revenue related to sanitary permits that bumped us up for revenue for 2020 compared to the other years. It's a thing where instead of some of the money going to the state, it now comes back to the county because we're doing some of the work in-house now compared to having the state review the sanitary plans. So we had that opportunity as well as other counties throughout the state. So it's bumped our revenue up for 2020.
What do you expect that revenue increase to be? What's your expected revenue from that source?
Yeah, it's
on
Let me,
page 504, about 14,400.
Okay,
yeah,
thank you.
yeah,
Thank
that sounds about right.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Supervisor Fari. Seeing no other call-ins for planning, we'll conclude that one. Thank you. We'll move on down to the next department. That's Land and Water Conservation. And that starts on page 528.
Getting there. Okay, for land and water conservation, the department staffing levels for 2020 are projected to be 7 full-time employees, the same as in 2019. The summary of significant changes is on page 529.
We'll open it up for any questions in regards to land and water conservation.
I'll mention, because I don't know if I ever told the board, but they received an award from a group that protects Lake Michigan for their efforts at marsh restoration and other projects, and really the formation of the fox, and I'm going to forget the name, but the Fox Wolf Watershed Alliance.
Well, it would be
Yeah.
the Winnebago Waterways.
That's it, that's it.
Yeah.
And, what flows out of Lake Winnebago eventually affects Green Bay and Lake Michigan, but we got an award for that work, and they've been a large part of that coalition.
Very good. All right, thank you. Seeing no call-ins, thank you very much for being here, Director Davies. We'll move on down to the next department, and that is the Solid Waste Department. Starts on page 589.
Now, solid waste is budgeted for 16 full-time employees. That's the same as last year. Solid waste operates differently than other departments. They're not on the county levy. They're funded from tipping fees and the directors in the back of the room.
Very good. Any questions in regards to Solid Waste Department budget? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next one. Thank you very much for being here, Director Robbie.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the final budget review, and that's Veterans Services. That starts on page 353.
Veteran Services is budgeted for 8 full-time employees, and that's the same as in 2019. I believe that we are, when fully staffed, we are one of the largest veterans service organizations in the state. And that partially accounts for the very significant amount of revenues that come into Winnebago County veterans. And the department head is in the back of the room.
Very good. We'll open it up for any questions in regards to the Veteran Services budget. I see one. Call on Supervisor Snyder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to piggyback on what the executive said. You all played along with me and funded from reserves to get our new benefit specialist on board early, and that has really paid really good dividends already, and I'm glad we did it, and I want to again thank the board for allowing me that latitude.
Thank you, Supervisor Snyder. Any other questions for Veteran Services? Seeing none, we'll conclude that one. Thank you very much for being here. So that actually concludes all our departmental budget reviews. I'll call on Supervisor Norton.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, are we not going to go through the miscellaneous unclassified part of the budget?
Yeah, that was actually, we certainly, if there's an issue, that was on finance, that was included in item number 8
Oh,
yesterday.
I did not know that.
But it's certain, but that's okay. If you have a question that you want to bring up.
Yes, I do.
That's where the opportunity is. So, please, go ahead.
On page 554, I would like the explanation of the County Fair Association will get $60,000, but will only get that full $60,000 if they plan, I think, have an event on the stage on the county expo grounds. I want to
I can take that because I'm largely responsible for
Then I'll have
that.
another question after you.
Yeah. Most counties do not subsidize their county fair. We give a substantial subsidy, but there is a historic basis for it. But when we negotiated with Life Fest, when they were building the stage, we negotiated for the fair to be able to use that stage free of charge. In most counties, the fairs generate traffic to the fair and substantial revenues from their live entertainment events. They've got this enormous valuable stage, and they've not elected to do it. Yet last year, we increased their subsidy another $10,000 to help them with the shortfall. And it was my way of trying to nudge them into scheduling some sort of entertainment on a stage they get to use for free. You know, the other counties are probably paying $50,000 to set up and take down stages. And our county has free access to it. And I'm just trying to nudge them along into to using it. I'm not surprised that the board may want to remove those strings, but it does seem a shame when they're not doing the one thing that could probably help them raise substantial revenues.
And my question, or a couple questions maybe, you know, when I asked Rob Way at our Parks Department, who's going to enforce this to make sure they do have a stage, and what kind of time frame? Because as Rob kind of mentioned before about the question about the stage, I mean, you know, it may take some while to get an act or get something on there. Obviously, if they don't have an act or an event on the stage, let's say by May or June, is that $10,000 going to be automatically taken away? I mean, I'm curious about the enforcement and when the deadline for the Fair Association to whoever enforces it to have this event.
We deliberately left it vague. We didn't require any particular quality or that there be a big name for the act, but we think if they have this significant stage free of charge, they should be able to schedule some live entertainment on there that would help boost their revenues and help them with their shortfall. And again, I believe we're the only county that subsidizes the fair to the extent that we do.
Thank you, Supervisor Norton. Next speaker, Vice Chairman Egan, followed by Supervisor Binder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know I'd have to talk about this. When we were at the convention, the NACO convention, I believe I know Supervisor Nussbaum was in there, Supervisor Binder, Supervisor Locke. I'm trying to think of who all was in that fair one. And they went all the way from $100,000 they gave just because they let them put up telephone things, and they gave them the whole amount of money. Another one said, well, we give them all the money. We don't charge them even for rent of any of it because you get all the horse shows and everything off it. And that stage is really nice. I won't knock that stage. But to say $10,000, I don't know if you ever went out and got a band for $10,000. That's going to sit in a mud puddle on that stage because it's not big enough. And when I say mud puddle, I don't mean a mud puddle, but that's what it's going to look like. They're going to look so small for a 10,000 band to even be up on there. That $60,000 will go back farther yet. We had always had gotten $60,000 when it moved out there, and I think you're the one that marked it down to $50,000. You or Jane Vandehey, one of the two. Because it used to be downtown, you got that land, or the county board did, got the land, and it was moved out there, and it was supposed to cost us $1 to go ahead and have the whole grounds. That included everything, the electricity, everything. But people wanted the parks to show that they made money and everything, and so then they charging us. And I'm not knocking that, but I am saying I think taking that $60,000 and saying we'll give you 50, and if you use the stage 10,000, I don't think that's a lure or whatever you want to call it. I think that's slapping us in the face. And when I say us, I'm not on the board anymore, but I think anyone that has interest in the fair, I just think that's a slap in the face because you can't even get a band decent that would look up on there for that.
Well, I never cut the fair subsidy. But last year, the board did an amendment to increase it by $10,000. And I just feel they could, probably a country western act, they're easier to obtain, they're less expensive. Most fairs make money when they schedule acts on their stage. So I'm saying if you want that much subsidy, you want us to help you, that you should at least try to help yourself.
Then maybe
and
you should...
I recognize that we probably would have difficulty enforcing that clause, but I definitely wanted to give them a nudge in the direction of making use of what was provided to them.
Maybe you should give them the $100,000 then to make it worthwhile, because you're going to have to charge people more in that to get in there and everything else. And somebody, I'm not going to point out who it was, said there was only like $3,000 there for one of the biggest shows that they had at Life Fest. And if they can't get them to draw in on that nice big stage that's out there, I don't know how anyone else was going to.
I think Life Fest had record attendance.
Well, they might
attend
attendance, but I'm talking about watching in front of the stage.
Oh.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Egan. Next speaker, Supervisor Binder, followed by Supervisor Norton.
Waterfest, they have a concert every Thursday night, and their best act had 3,500 people. That stage is built for 20,000 to 35,000 people. The year that the fair had Lone Star, that band charged $50,000, and the fair lost $37,000 because they had 800 people watch that band. And the Midway takes 35% of all ticket sales, so the fair gets about $10 a ticket. You take those 800 people times that $10, they got $8,000, and just the expense of the band, not the stage, nothing else, that cost them $50,000. So they lost $37,000 just on that one band. And now when you talk about bringing in 15,000 people, you also have to bring in porta potties, because we have a few bathrooms in there, but we don't have enough bathrooms for 15 or 20,000 people. So now you got to bring in porta potties for them. And then you're not going to have enough parking on the fairgrounds itself. So now you have to go over to County Park, and now you have to get another special events permit from the city of Oshkosh, because you're going to need more police protection. So it's not an easy thing to do.
Well, as you notice, I didn't specify that they had to have a big act, but I think they can schedule something on the stage, and I have a real fear that even though they're getting a stage that's worth $50,000, I have a fear that they're not even going to attempt to schedule an act.
They were going to look into it, but like I say, they have to go through the costs. This year, they basically, when Mike took over, they were $37,000 in the hole. Like when they basically got the county $60,000, they paid their bills for the year before, and they had about $12,000 to start the fair. So they didn't come in with a lot of money. And even a band like Vic Ferrari, it's a $15,000 band. And, you know, you see them in a tavern, you know, like up at Waverly Beach. They maybe get 400 or 500 people. You know, it'll look like, you know, you got some ants when you got this big area that seats 35,000 people and you got 400 people standing in front of the stage. They actually pay to have that stage put up, but at least it looks like they have a few people there when they get 500 people. And it'd be kind of like having a gigantic stadium and only have a couple people there. You know, it just, you got to have a venue to make it's like the city thought that the amphitheater was going to be this big hit, and they had PMI try to promote it. They promoted it for 1 year, told them there's no money in it. So now Verb has a free concert on Tuesday and Waterfest has a concert on Thursday. And when was the last time you've seen the city of Oshkosh get any major act down there on a Friday or Saturday night? It just sits empty or there's a wedding.
They do occasionally have a significant act, but they usually require a corporate sponsor. And the reason for that is that the grounds won't hold a sufficient number of people for the ticket sales to cover the cost of a bigger band. So they schedule a lot of bands that were popular in the 70s and 80s that are older now. But I was just trying to nudge the fair into trying to use a free stage. We negotiated for something that was worth, in my opinion, about $50,000. And I don't think they're going to make any use of it at all, which is disappointing.
I happened to go to the Menominee Nation. They had Pam Tillis there. They had Gladys Knight there. They had the Temptations there. And not a one of them probably had 1,000 people, and that seats 5,500. That Menominee Nation lost money on every one of them concerts. And as you know, that they basically, the promoter filed bankruptcy. So, you know, we have so many. We got basically Country USA, Rock USA. We're competing at an enormous, you know, there's so many venues. And the year we built that stage, Alpine Valley shut down because they had no acts for a whole year. They shut Alpine Valley down, and when you and I were growing up, that was the hottest place there was.
Yeah.
And nothing for a whole summer, so they shut down. So I just think it's going to be hard to get a promoter to come in there. It's an outside venue. Hopefully we can. I mean, we went that route. We spent the money. We got the parking lot. We got the camping.
And of course, we didn't build the stage. The stage was built entirely with Life Fest funds.
Right. Well, we did the groundwork.
We've got the grounds.
Yeah, we got about $180,000, and we had $1.5 million racetrack we tore up. So no matter how you look at it, we got that money invested there. Hopefully, that's in the past. We have to go forward now. Hopefully, the parks can get some venue, and they'll see it's a nice setup, and people will come there. But I really don't think that the Fair Associations is going to bail us out of this one.
I'm not expecting any contribution back to the county, but I was hoping they would try and use the stage. I knew that, I told Vicki when we did this, that I don't know if this will survive the board, but it's the signal that I wanted to send, that I think they should try and make use of a free stage. I have to believe that that could boost attendance. The attendance at our fair is low.
It is very low.
All right, thank you Supervisor Binder. Now, we started talking a little bit more about the fair and the $10,000, but we have an amendment about that. So I guess I would ask they would hold off on further debate about that because, once again, we have an amendment about that very issue as part of our amendment. So Supervisor Norton?
Yeah, one quick question, and maybe you could answer, or the county executive. Is the Live Well Fox Valley Initiative, is that the initiative that Doug Gearing talked to us at a county or health board meeting back in, I believe, it was August or so? Do you remember?
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
And my question, maybe further to you, and Chairman Child, Raymond, you can back me up. I believe the cost for this initiative was much greater than this, I thought he said at the time.
Yeah,
Yes.
there was a project called Way to the Fox Valley that had to do with healthy lifestyles. That was going to then evolve into a much broader program. And the health department was out soliciting participation in the program from local hospitals and other agencies. And it's a healthy living type program. He did ask us for quite a bit more money. He asked us for a 3-year commitment, but I was unwilling to put that in a budget where we were already so tightly squeezed on operations. So we put a lesser amount in for 1 year, and that's what that is.
Thank you Supervisor Norton. Next speaker is Supervisor Wojciechowski, followed by Vice Chairman Egan.
This is kind of just my 2 cents on the issue, but I think to kind of go off of Supervisor Bender was saying, you know, if you're looking to attract more people, maybe they need to look at some more diversity in type of musics that they're having at these venues. You know, we really have typically Christian music, rock, and country, and that's basically what you get at any of these venues in the Fox Valley area. And, you know, people drive 2, 3 hours, 4 hours sometimes to Milwaukee, Chicago because the different types of music they have there. So I don't know. It's something to look into. The campus, UW Oshkosh, every year hosts their By Gosh Fest, and they have someone come, usually more pop, rap, etc. But that attracts a lot of students and a lot of young people who come. So just something to think about, you know. Just diversify maybe the music, and maybe you can attract more people.
Thank you, Supervisor Wojciechowski. Next speaker, Supervisor Albrecht.
I just wanted to comment on Supervisor Binder's remarks. All those venues that were stated, Country USA and on, they were all created by Winnebago County.
Thank you, Supervisor Albrecht. Seeing no other call-ins, that concludes our official budget review. So at this point, we have 4 amendments. I think there might be a 5th one. No? So there's 4 amendments at this point. You all should have received those, okay? Okay, all right. So we have 4 amendments. And we have 3 more coming. Okay. Yes, so there's a motion to recess for 5 minutes so that there'd be an opportunity. There's 3 more that are coming in, and give folks an opportunity to look at those. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We'll take a short recess and then be back at it.